The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Derek Williams swiped another can of soup across the scanner. It was Tuesday afternoon at Save Mart, and the store was packed with the usual after-work crowd. People rushed through the aisles, grabbing what they needed before heading home to their families. Derek had been working this register for 3 years now, and he knew the rhythm of the place like the back of his hand. At 23 years old, Derek wasn't exactly where he thought he'd be in life. Most of his high school friends had gone off to fancy universities, posting pictures of campus life and study abroad trips on social media. Meanwhile, Derek wore the same green vest every day and helped people bag their groceries. But he didn't complain. Life had dealt him a different hand, and he was doing his best to play it. The community college courses he took at night were slowly adding up toward a degree. It would take him twice as long as everyone else, maybe longer, but at least he was moving forward. Between his full-time job at the store and his classes, Derek barely had time to sleep. But sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. There were bills to pay and responsibilities that couldn't wait. As Derek finished with another customer and called out, "Next in line, please," he noticed an elderly man shuffling toward his register. The man moved slowly, carefully, like each step required thought and effort. His coat was thin and worn, with a small tear near the pocket that someone had tried to mend with mismatched thread. Despite the chilly autumn weather outside, the coat looked like it had seen better days many seasons ago. The old man placed his basket on the counter with shaky hands. Derek glanced at the items inside and felt a familiar tug in his chest. There wasn't much there. A loaf of white bread, the cheapest kind the store carried, a small jar of peanut butter, and a half-gallon of milk with a bright yellow sticker that said, "Reduced for quick sale." These were the items in the discount section, the ones about to hit their expiration date that the store needed to move fast. "How are you doing today, sir?" Derek asked with a genuine smile as he began scanning the items. The old man looked up, and Derek noticed his eyes. They were kind eyes, the sort that held years of stories behind them. "Oh, I'm getting by, young man. Can't complain. The good Lord's been watching over me." Derek nodded and continued ringing up the groceries. The total came to $14.63. It wasn't much, barely enough food for a few days, but Derek had learned not to judge. He'd seen all kinds of people come through his line over the years. Sometimes the people who looked like they had nothing were the ones with the biggest hearts. The elderly man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. The edges were frayed, and Derek could see where the stitching had come undone in places. The man opened it carefully and began counting out bills. One $5 bill, 3 ones, that made $8. He dug deeper into the wallet, pulling out more crumpled singles. 9, 10, 11. Then came the coins. The old man's hands trembled slightly as he placed quarters on the counter, then dimes, then nickels. He counted slowly, his lips moving with each coin. Derek waited patiently, ignoring the growing line behind the elderly man. He could feel the impatience radiating from the other customers, could hear someone sigh loudly a few people back. The man counted the money 3 times, his weathered fingers pushing the coins into different piles. Each time he came up short. His face, already lined with age and worry, seemed to collapse further with each recount. The flush of embarrassment crept up his neck, turning his ears red. "I'm so sorry," the old man said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I had enough. I must have miscounted at home." He started reaching for the items, preparing to put something back. "I can do without the milk, I suppose. Or maybe just the bread." Behind him, someone groaned. "Come on." "Some of us have places to be," a voice called out. Derek glanced at the line. A woman in a business suit tapped her foot impatiently, checking her watch. A younger guy was already pulling out his phone, probably to complain on social media about slow service. Another customer shook their head and switched to a different line. But Derek wasn't looking at them anymore. He was looking at the old man, at the shame written across his face, at the way his shoulders had slumped in defeat. Derek had seen that look before. He'd seen it on his own mother's face 2 years ago, when she'd been too sick to work, but the bills kept coming anyway. He'd felt it himself plenty of times, standing in lines just like this one, counting his money and praying it would be enough. Something inside Derek made a decision before his brain could overthink it. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his own wallet. It wasn't much fancier than the old man's, if he was being honest. Inside, he had 2 $20 bills and a 10. That $50 was supposed to last him until Friday. 20 was earmarked for gas. The other 30 was for the textbook he needed for his economics class, a used copy he'd found online. Derek pulled out a $5 bill and swiped his debit card before the old man could protest. The transaction went through with a beep. "Wait, son, what are you doing?" the elderly man asked, confusion and surprise mixing in his expression. "Don't worry about it, sir," Derek said, bagging the groceries and handing them over with a warm smile. "You have a good day now, okay? Stay warm out there." The old man's eyes filled with tears. He reached out and gripped Derek's hand with surprising strength. "Bless you, young man. Bless you. My name is Harold. What's yours?" "I'm Derek. And really, it's no big deal. We all need a little help sometimes, right?" Harold held Derek's hand for another moment, looking at him with an intensity that seemed odd for such a simple exchange. "Derek, I won't forget this. I won't forget your kindness." "Take care of yourself, Harold," Derek said gently, already turning to the next customer. As Harold walked away, bags in hand, Derek's co-worker, Sheila, leaned over from the next register. She was a woman in her 50s who'd worked at Save Mart for over a decade. "You know that's coming out of your own pocket, right? Corporate isn't going to reimburse you for being nice." Derek shrugged, scanning the next customer's items. "I know. It's fine." "You're too soft-hearted for your own good, Derek. That's at least the 3rd time this month you've done something like that. You're not exactly rolling in money yourself." She wasn't wrong. Derek's checking account was already running on fumes, and payday was still 3 days away. The textbook would have to wait another week, which meant falling behind in class. He'd have to eat ramen for dinner more often than usual. But somehow, none of that seemed to matter as much as it should have. "Maybe," Derek admitted with a small smile. "But I sleep okay at night." Sheila shook her head but smiled back. "You're one of the good ones, kid. Don't let this world change that." Derek went back to scanning groceries, falling into the familiar rhythm of beeps and bag rustling. He didn't notice that Harold had paused near the store's exit, standing beside a display of seasonal decorations. The old man wasn't leaving. Instead, he was watching Derek with those same intense eyes, studying the way the young cashier interacted with each customer. The way he smiled at a tired mother struggling with a fussy toddler. The way he didn't rush an elderly woman who couldn't remember her PIN number. The way he offered to help carry bags for a man on crutches. Harold stood there for almost 15 minutes, just observing. Finally, he pulled out a cell phone from his coat pocket. It wasn't the flip phone you'd expect an old man in threadbare clothes to carry. It was new, expensive. He dialed a number and spoke quietly into it, his eyes never leaving Derek. "I think I found him," Harold said into the phone. "After all these weeks of looking, I finally found exactly what I've been searching for." He ended the call and shuffled out of the store, disappearing into the autumn evening. Derek never saw him leave, too busy with the steady stream of customers that continued until his shift ended 4 hours later. He clocked out, grabbed his backpack from his locker, and headed to his evening class, completely unaware that his life had just changed forever. The $4.37 he'd spent that afternoon would turn out to be the best investment he'd ever made, though he wouldn't know it for another 2 weeks. 2 weeks passed, and Derek's life continued in its familiar pattern. Wake up at 6, work the morning shift at Save Mart, grab something quick for lunch, head to his afternoon class at the community college, then back home to help his younger sister with her homework. It was exhausting, but it was his life, and he'd learned to find small moments of joy in the routine. What Derek didn't realize was that he'd become the subject of someone's very careful attention. Harold had returned to Save Mart the day after their encounter, and the day after that, and nearly every day since. But he never came through Derek's checkout line again. Instead, he wandered the aisles slowly, pretending to shop, watching, always watching. He observed the way Derek greeted every single customer with the same genuine warmth, whether they were kind or rude in return. He saw Derek spend 10 minutes helping an overwhelmed young mother load her groceries into her car, while her kids ran circles around them, even though his break had already ended. He watched Derek stay late without complaint when another cashier called in sick, even though it meant missing his study group. But Derek noticed Harold, too. It was hard not to. The old man with the worn coat had become a regular fixture in the store, always there during Derek's shifts. Sometimes Derek would catch him standing near the cereal aisle, not really looking at anything, just standing there. Other times, Harold would be by the produce section, holding the same apple for 5 minutes without putting it in a basket. "That old guy is here again," Sheila mentioned one afternoon, nodding toward Harold, who was slowly making his way past the bread aisle. "The one you helped a couple weeks back. He's been coming in almost every day. Never buys much, though. Kind of strange, don't you think?" Derek glanced over and waved at Harold, who nodded back with a small smile. "Maybe he's just lonely. A lot of older folks come in just to be around people, you know? Have someone to say hello to." "Yeah, maybe," Sheila said, though she didn't sound convinced. "Still seems odd how he's always here when you're working." Derek shrugged it off. He had bigger things to worry about. His economics textbook had finally arrived, but now his car was making a weird rattling noise that probably meant an expensive trip to the mechanic. His sister needed new shoes for basketball practice. The electricity bill had gone up. It was always something, always another challenge to figure out. What Derek definitely didn't know was what happened when Harold left the store each day. The old man would walk 2 blocks down the street, turn into a parking garage, and climb into a sleek black town car where his driver waited. Then Harold would pull out a leather-bound notebook and write detailed observations about what he'd seen. "Subject shows consistent pattern of helping behavior," one entry read. "Not performative. Doesn't look around to see who's watching. Appears to genuinely care about customers as individuals." Another entry noted, "Stayed 90 minutes past end of shift to help train new employee. Refused overtime pay. Said the kid needed extra time to learn properly." Harold had been making these notes for 2 weeks straight. He'd also done something else. He'd spoken quietly with other Save Mart employees during his visits, asking casual questions about Derek. What kind of worker was he? How did he treat his co-workers? Had anyone ever seen him lose his temper or be unkind? The responses were remarkably unanimous. "Derek, he's the best person we have here," one stalker told him. "Always volunteers to take the harder shifts so people with kids can be home with their families." The store's assistant manager had added, "I've tried to promote him 3 times. He deserves it. But he can't afford to take the 2-week unpaid training period. Says he can't miss 2 weeks of paychecks. It's a shame, really. Kid's got real leadership potential." Even the difficult customers had stories. Harold had watched Derek handle a man who was furious about a coupon not working, staying calm and patient until the situation was resolved. He'd seen Derek diffuse an argument between 2 customers fighting over the last discounted turkey. Each time, Derek remained steady, kind, and focused on making things right rather than just following rules. Back at Save Mart, Derek was completely unaware he was being evaluated. He was too busy living his life, trying to keep all the pieces from falling apart. On Thursday afternoon of the second week, something happened that almost pushed Derek past his breaking point. His sister called during his shift, crying. She'd been accepted into a special academic program at school, an honor that could help her get into a good college someday. But there was a fee, $250. It might as well have been $2,000 for all the chance Derek had of coming up with that kind of money in the 2 weeks before the deadline. During his break, Derek sat in his car in the parking lot, head in his hands. He'd already picked up every extra shift he could. He'd sold his old gaming console last month. There was nothing left to cut from the budget because there was no budget. It was just survival, day by day. For a moment, just a brief moment, Derek let himself feel the weight of it all, the tiredness, the constant worry, the feeling that no matter how hard he worked, he was always one emergency away from disaster. He was 23 years old and he felt ancient. But then he took a deep breath, wiped his eyes, and went back inside. His break was over, and there were customers waiting. Feeling sorry for himself wouldn't change anything. It never did. Harold was in the store when Derek returned to his register, and the old man saw something in Derek's eyes, a tiredness that hadn't been there that morning. Harold watched as Derek still smiled at customers, still helped bag groceries with care, still treated everyone with dignity. But there was a heaviness to him now, a weight that seemed almost visible. That evening, after Derek's shift ended, Harold made a phone call. This time it was longer, more detailed. He spoke with authority, making decisions and giving instructions. When he hung up, he looked satisfied. Everything was in place. Tomorrow would be the day. Derek drove home that night with the radio off, too lost in thought to even want music. He was doing the math in his head, trying to figure out if there was any possible way to make this work for his sister. Maybe he could ask for an advance on his paycheck? But he'd done that twice already this year. Maybe he could try to get a small loan, but his credit wasn't exactly great, and the interest would kill him. He didn't notice the black town car that followed him at a discreet distance, making notes of the route he took home. Didn't notice when it parked across from his apartment building, observing which unit he entered. Harold watched from the back seat as Derek climbed the stairs to a small apartment on the 3rd floor. The building wasn't in the best neighborhood, but it wasn't the worst either. Just another place where working people tried to make ends meet. "That's enough for today," Harold told his driver. "Tomorrow morning, first thing, contact Mr. Peterson at the Save Mart location. Tell him I'll be there at 10 a.m., and I want young Derek Williams brought to the manager's office. Don't tell him why. I want everyone's genuine reaction." The driver nodded and started the car. As they pulled away, Harold looked back at the building one more time. "I hope I'm right about you, son," he said quietly to himself. "I really hope I'm right." The next morning, Derek woke up to his alarm at 6 a.m., just like always. He had no idea that today would be different. No idea that in just a few hours, his entire life would turn upside down. He got ready for work in the dark, trying not to wake his sister, ate a quick breakfast of toast and coffee, and headed out the door. Just another day, he thought. Just another shift. He had no idea how wrong he was. No idea that the old man he'd helped with $4.37 was about to change everything. No idea that sometimes one small act of kindness can ripple out in ways you never imagine. Derek clocked in at Save Mart at 7 a.m. sharp, put on his green vest, and walked to his register. It was Friday, which meant the store would be busy. People stocking up for the weekend, buying groceries for family dinners, rushing through before work. He took a deep breath and pressed the button to call the first customer forward. "Next in line, please," Derek called out, his voice tired but still friendly. He had 3 hours until everything changed. 3 hours of normal life before Harold Bennett walked back into the store, this time without the disguise, ready to reveal who he really was and make an offer that would seem impossible. At 9:45 in the morning, Derek was in the middle of ringing up a customer's groceries when he heard his name called over the store's intercom system. "Derek Williams to the manager's office, please." "Derek Williams to the manager's office." His heart dropped into his stomach. In 3 years of working at Save Mart, he'd never been called to the manager's office. Not once. That kind of announcement was never good news. People got called to the office when they were in trouble, when someone complained about them, or worse, when they were about to be let go. Derek's hands started to shake slightly as he finished the transaction. His mind raced through the past few weeks, trying to think of anything he might have done wrong. Had he been rude to someone without realizing it? Had he made a mistake with the cash register? Was it about him paying for that old man's groceries? Maybe corporate had rules against that sort of thing. "You okay, Derek?" Sheila asked from the next register over, noticing the color drain from his face. "Yeah, I just got called to the office," Derek said, his voice tight with worry. "Can you watch my register for a minute?" "Of course, honey. I'm sure it's nothing," Sheila said, but her expression showed she was worried too. Derek walked through the store toward the back offices, his green vest suddenly feeling too tight around his chest. He passed the produce section, the bakery, the customer service desk. Each step felt heavier than the last. He couldn't afford to lose this job. He just couldn't. Not with his sister's program fee due. Not with rent coming up next week. Not with everything riding on his paycheck. When he reached the manager's office, he knocked quietly on the door. Mr. Peterson, the store manager, called out for him to enter. Derek pushed the door open and stepped inside. And that's when his confusion multiplied by 100. Mr. Peterson sat behind his desk looking nervous, sweating despite the air conditioning. But it was the other person in the room who made Derek stop in his tracks. Harold sat in a chair in the corner of the office, except he didn't look anything like the Harold that Derek knew. The worn, threadbare coat was gone. Instead, the old man wore a suit that looked like it cost more money than Derek made in 6 months, maybe a year. It was perfectly tailored, dark navy with a subtle pinstripe. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. Even his posture was different. He sat with confidence, with authority, like someone who was used to being in charge. Derek blinked, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. This couldn't be the same person, but those eyes, those kind eyes, they were unmistakably Harold's. "Derek, please have a seat," Mr. Peterson said, gesturing to the empty chair across from his desk. His voice cracked slightly, and he cleared his throat. Derek sat down slowly, his eyes moving between his manager and Harold, trying to understand what was happening. "Sir, is everything okay? Did I do something wrong?" Harold leaned forward, a slight smile on his weathered face. "No, son. You didn't do anything wrong. Quite the opposite, actually. Derek, I need to tell you something, and I apologize for the deception. My full name is Harold Bennett. I'm the founder and CEO of Bennett Enterprises." The words hung in the air, but they didn't make sense to Derek at first. Bennett Enterprises. He'd heard that name before. It was on some of the corporate paperwork around the store, on the employee handbook he'd received when he was hired. Bennett Enterprises was the company that owned Save Mart, that owned dozens of stores across the entire southeastern United States. Derek's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked at Mr. Peterson, who nodded, confirming that this was real. "I know this must be confusing," Harold continued, his voice warm but businesslike. "Let me explain. For the past 30 years, I've made it a practice to visit our stores in disguise. I dress down, I observe, I interact with employees and customers as a regular person. It helps me stay connected to what really happens at ground level, away from boardrooms and reports." Derek found his voice, though it came out weaker than he intended. You were testing me? That day with the groceries, you were testing me? Not exactly, Harold said, shaking his head. I was observing, yes. But that moment at your register, that was genuine. I really did come up short. What you did, how you responded, that wasn't part of any plan. That was all you, Derek. That was your character showing through. Derek's mind was spinning. He thought back to that afternoon 2 weeks ago, to the $4.37 he'd paid, without thinking twice. I don't understand. Why are you telling me this? Why am I here? Harold stood up and walked closer to Derek's chair. Up close in that expensive suit, he looked like a completely different person, but his expression was gentle, almost fatherly. Because after that day, I kept watching you. I've been coming to this store for 2 weeks, Derek. I've watched how you treat every single customer with respect. I've watched you stay late to help your coworkers. I've watched you go out of your way to make people's days a little better, even when you're clearly tired and stressed yourself. I've also spoken with your colleagues, Harold continued. Everyone, and I mean everyone, speaks highly of you. Mr. Peterson here tells me he's tried to promote you multiple times, but you can't afford to take the unpaid training period. Mr. Peterson nodded. Derek's one of the best employees we've ever had. If I could make him assistant manager tomorrow, I would. Derek sat there, overwhelmed, still not understanding where this was going. I appreciate that, sir, but I still don't understand why I'm here. Why you went through all this trouble. Harold returned to his chair and sat down, looking at Derek with those intense eyes that had watched him for 2 weeks. Derek, in 30 years of doing these undercover visits, I've met thousands of employees. Good people, hard-working people. But rarely, very rarely, do I meet someone who has what I saw in you. Genuine compassion. Integrity that doesn't waver even when no one's watching. Leadership qualities that have nothing to do with a title or a degree. He paused, letting his words sink in. My company needs leaders, Derek, not just managers, but real leaders. People who understand that business isn't just about profit margins and quarterly reports. It's about people, the employees who show up every day, the customers who trust us with their business, the communities we serve. Derek's heart was pounding now, a mix of hope and disbelief swirling inside him. He was afraid to let himself imagine what Harold might be suggesting, afraid of being disappointed. I want to offer you a position in our executive training program, Harold said, his voice clear and firm. It's a fast-track leadership program that prepares promising individuals for management positions throughout our company. The program lasts 18 months and includes intensive training in all aspects of retail management, operations, finance, and leadership. Derek opened his mouth, but Harold held up a hand, indicating he wasn't finished. The position comes with a starting salary of $65,000 a year, full health and dental benefits, and most importantly, we'll cover your college tuition so you can finish your degree. We want you to complete your education while you work with us. The number hit Derek like a physical force. $65,000. He currently made $28,000 a year, and that was with all the overtime he could possibly squeeze in. $65,000 was more than double his current salary. It was the kind of money that meant his sister could do her program. That meant he could fix his car properly instead of praying it lasted another month. That meant maybe, just maybe, he could breathe a little easier. I don't know what to say, Derek whispered, his eyes stinging with tears he was trying desperately to hold back. Mr. Bennett, I never finished college. I don't have an MBA or a business degree. Most of the people in a program like that probably went to fancy schools and have all the right credentials. I'm just a cashier. Harold smiled, and for a moment he looked exactly like the humble old man Derek had helped 2 weeks ago. You're not just anything, Derek. Yes, you're a cashier, but you're also someone who sees people, not transactions. Someone who leads by example without even realizing it. Someone who treats a struggling elderly man with the same dignity you'd give a CEO. He paused. Though I suppose in that case it was the same person. Despite everything, Derek laughed a little at that, wiping at his eyes. I won't lie to you, Harold said, his tone becoming more serious. This won't be easy. You'll be working with people who have degrees from prestigious universities. Some of them might question why you're there. You'll have to work harder than you've ever worked before. But Derek, I believe in you. I believe you have something that can't be taught in any classroom. Derek looked down at his hands, at the green vest he wore every day, at the name tag that said his position was cashier. Then he looked up at Harold, at this man who'd seen something in him that he'd never seen in himself. When would I start? Derek asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Harold smiled broadly. How does 2 weeks from Monday sound? That gives you time to wrap things up here and prepare for the change. Derek nodded, unable to speak. The tears finally spilled over, running down his cheeks. He wasn't embarrassed. These weren't tears of sadness or stress like the ones he'd cried in his car yesterday. These were different. These were tears of hope. 6 months had passed since that life-changing morning in Mr. Peterson's office, and Derek still sometimes felt like he was living someone else's life. He stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of Bennett Enterprises' corporate headquarters, looking out over the city skyline. His reflections stared back at him, a young man in a crisp dress shirt and tie, holding a leather portfolio that had been a welcome gift from the company. It felt surreal. The Bennett Enterprises building was everything Derek had never experienced before. Gleaming marble floors, modern art on the walls, conference rooms with names like Innovation and Vision. The executive dining hall on the 20th floor served food Derek couldn't even pronounce. Everyone moved with purpose, speaking in a language of quarterly projections, market analyses, and strategic initiatives. Derek's fellow trainees in the executive program were exactly what he'd expected. There was Jennifer, who'd graduated top of her class from Wharton Business School. Michael had come from Harvard with a perfect GPA and family connections that went back 3 generations in the retail industry. Claire had worked at a prestigious consulting firm before joining Bennett Enterprises. They were all brilliant, polished, and seemed to navigate this corporate world as easily as breathing. And then there was Derek, the cashier from Save Mart. Not everyone was welcoming. Some executives looked at him with barely concealed skepticism when Harold introduced him at the company-wide meeting. Derek could hear the whispers in the break room, the quiet conversations that stopped when he walked by. Charity case, someone had muttered. Publicity stunt, another had said, not quite quietly enough. One senior manager, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, had been blunt during their first one-on-one meeting. I'll be honest with you, Derek, I don't understand this decision. We have candidates with MBAs waiting in line for this program. What makes you qualified to be here? Derek hadn't known how to answer that. What did make him qualified? He'd spent the first month feeling like an imposter, like any moment someone would realize a mistake had been made and send him back to his register at Save Mart. The training was intense, more intense than Derek had imagined. Financial modeling, supply chain management, strategic planning, corporate law. His classmates tossed around terms like synergy and leverage and vertical integration like they were discussing the weather. Derek spent his nights buried in books, watching online tutorials, trying to catch up on 4 years of business school education while also keeping up with the current coursework. There were moments when Derek wanted to quit. Late nights when he'd stare at a spreadsheet full of numbers that wouldn't make sense no matter how many times he reviewed them. Meetings where everyone else seemed to understand the discussion while he felt completely lost. Times when he'd see his reflection in the office windows and wonder what he was doing here, pretending to be something he wasn't. But then something started to shift. It happened gradually, so slowly Derek almost didn't notice at first. During a strategy meeting about improving store efficiency, the discussion turned to cutting costs. Michael presented a detailed plan to reduce staffing during slower hours, showing impressive charts about labor cost savings. Everyone nodded along, impressed by the numbers. Derek raised his hand hesitantly. "Can I ask something? Have we considered how this would impact the actual employees? A lot of our staff work multiple jobs and depend on consistent hours. If we cut their shifts, we might save money short term, but we'd lose good people who can't afford the unpredictable schedule." The room went quiet. Michael looked annoyed at being questioned, but Harold, who sat at the head of the table, leaned forward with interest. "Go on, Derek." "When I worked at Save Mart, I saw what happened when corporate cut hours to save money. The best employees left for more stable jobs. We ended up with constant turnover, which meant always training new people, lower customer service quality, and actually higher costs in the long run. What if instead of cutting hours, we looked at ways to increase productivity during those slower periods? Cross-training, restocking, deep cleaning, customer outreach?" Harold smiled. "That's excellent thinking, Derek. That's exactly the kind of perspective we need." Patricia, the manager who'd questioned his qualifications, didn't smile, but she nodded slightly. It was a small victory, but it meant something. More moments like that followed. During a discussion about closing underperforming stores, Derek pointed out that some of those stores served communities that would become food deserts without them. When the team debated switching to automated checkout systems to reduce labor costs, Derek explained why many customers, especially elderly ones, valued the human interaction and how that loyalty was worth more than the savings. His ideas didn't always win out, but people started listening. More importantly, Derek realized something crucial. He wasn't trying to become like Michael or Jennifer or Claire. He couldn't. He didn't have their fancy degrees or their years of business theory. But he had something they didn't have. He understood what it felt like to be on the other side of those corporate decisions. He knew the real cost of efficiency measures and profit margins because he'd lived it. Harold met with Derek privately once a month, mentoring sessions that Derek came to treasure. The old man shared stories from his own journey building Bennett Enterprises from a single store into a regional powerhouse. He talked about the mistakes he'd made, the times he'd chosen profit over people, and regretted it. "You know what the hardest part of success is, Derek?" Harold asked during one of their meetings. "Staying connected to why you started in the first place. I built this company because I wanted to serve communities, to provide good jobs, to make people's lives a little easier. Somewhere along the way, as we got bigger, some of that got lost in spreadsheets and shareholder reports." "That's why you do the undercover visits," Derek said, understanding dawning on him. "Exactly. And that's why I need people like you in leadership positions. People who remember that behind every transaction is a person. Behind every employee number is someone trying to feed their family, pay their rent, build a life." Harold looked at Derek seriously. "You're not here despite being a cashier, Derek. You're here because you were a cashier." Derek's life outside work had transformed too. He'd moved his sister and himself to a better apartment in a safer neighborhood. His sister was thriving in her academic program, talking excitedly about college applications. Derek had even bought a reliable used car that didn't make concerning noises every time he started it. But success brought new pressures. The higher Derek climbed, the more he felt the weight of expectations. Some people were rooting for him, inspired by his story. Others were waiting for him to fail, eager to prove that Harold's faith had been misplaced. The real test came during Derek's 6th month in the program. Bennett Enterprises was considering acquiring a smaller competitor that was struggling financially. The acquisition team had prepared a standard plan: buy the company, close redundant stores, lay off duplicate staff, absorb the profitable locations into the Bennett system. Derek reviewed the plan over a weekend, and something bothered him. The numbers made sense on paper, But he kept thinking about the 3,000 employees who would lose their jobs under this plan. 3,000 people who'd done nothing wrong except work for a company that got outcompeted. On Monday morning, Derek did something that terrified him. He requested a meeting with Harold and the acquisition team to present an alternative proposal. He'd spent the entire weekend working on it, barely sleeping, running numbers until his eyes burned. His hands shook as he stood in front of the conference room, facing a dozen executives who had decades more experience than him. Patricia was there, arms crossed, expression skeptical. Michael smirked slightly, clearly expecting Derek to embarrass himself. "I've reviewed the acquisition plan," Derek began, his voice steadier than he felt. "And I'd like to propose a different approach." He pulled up his presentation, crude compared to the slick graphics the others used, but filled with real data and real solutions. Instead of mass layoffs, Derek proposed a community integration model. Retrain employees rather than replace them. Convert struggling stores into community hubs with expanded services. Create a gradual transition that preserved jobs while still achieving profitability, just over a longer timeline. "It'll take 3 years instead of 1 to see full returns," Derek admitted. "But we'd preserve 70% of the jobs, maintain community goodwill, and build long-term loyalty. The customers at these stores aren't just numbers. They're people who've shopped there for years, who know the staff by name. That's worth something." When he finished, the room was silent. Derek's heart pounded. He'd just challenged a plan created by people with far more experience and education than him. He'd probably overstepped, probably made a fool of himself. Then Harold started clapping, slowly at first, then enthusiastically. "That, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly the kind of thinking this company needs. Derek, your plan has merit, real merit. Let's explore it further." Not everyone agreed. Patricia spoke up immediately. "With all due respect, Harold, this is a business decision, not a charity. We have shareholders to answer to. Derek's plan sounds nice, but it's not realistic." "Actually," said Thomas, the CFO, looking at his tablet where he'd been running quick calculations, "if Derek's retention and community loyalty projections are even 70% accurate, his plan could actually outperform ours by year 5. It's riskier short-term, but potentially more profitable long-term." The debate continued for 2 hours. Derek defended his proposal, answered questions, admitted when he didn't know something but explained his reasoning. By the end, the team agreed to seriously consider a hybrid approach incorporating many of Derek's ideas. As everyone filed out of the conference room, Patricia stopped beside Derek. She looked at him for a long moment, and Derek braced himself for criticism. Instead, she said quietly, "I was wrong about you. That was impressive work." It wasn't a complete victory. It wasn't even certain his ideas would be implemented. But as Derek walked back to his desk, he realized something important. He belonged here. Not because he'd learned to act like everyone else, but because he'd found a way to be himself in this new world. His perspective, shaped by years of struggle and hard work, wasn't a weakness. It was his strength. That night, Derek called his sister to tell her about his day. As he talked, he thought about Harold in that threadbare coat, counting out coins at a register. $4.37. Such a small amount that had led to all of this. Sometimes kindness comes back to you in ways you never expect. And sometimes, the very things that make you different are exactly what the world needs. 15 months into Derek's journey at Bennett Enterprises, everything changed in a single morning. Harold collapsed during a board meeting. One moment he was speaking about quarterly projections. The next he was on the floor, his words slurring, the right side of his face drooping. The ambulance arrived within minutes, but those minutes felt like hours. Stroke. That's what the doctors said. A significant one. Harold would recover, they assured everyone, but it would take time. Months of rehabilitation. He wouldn't be able to handle the stress of running a major corporation for the foreseeable future. the company went into crisis mode. Harold had been the heart and soul of Bennett Enterprises for over 40 years. He'd built it from nothing, guided it through recessions and market shifts, kept it focused on values when other companies chased only profits. Without him, nobody quite knew what would happen. The board of directors held emergency meetings. Derek attended as a junior member of the leadership team, still one of the newest and youngest people in the room. He sat quietly, listening as the debate grew heated about the company's direction during Harold's absence. Robert Cranston, the chief financial officer, took charge of the conversation. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a reputation for ruthless efficiency. Derek had interacted with him a few times and always felt uncomfortable. Cranston looked at people like they were numbers on a spreadsheet, calculating their value with cold precision. "Gentlemen, ladies," Cranston said, standing at the head of the conference table, "this is unfortunate timing, but we need to be realistic. Harold's health situation gives us an opportunity to make necessary changes that he's been too sentimental to implement." Derek felt his stomach tighten. He didn't like where this was going. Cranston pulled up a presentation, clicking through slides filled with charts and projections. "I'm proposing we move forward with the aggressive acquisition plan for Thompson's markets. We buy them out, close 70% of their locations, liquidate their assets, and absorb their market share. The profit potential is significant." "That's 3,000 jobs," Derek said before he could stop himself. Everyone turned to look at him. 3,000 people who'd lose their livelihoods." Cranston barely glanced at him. "That's business, Derek. Thompson's is failing because they're inefficient. We'd be doing the market a favor by removing that inefficiency." "Harold wouldn't approve this," Derek said, his voice stronger now. "This goes against everything the company stands for." "Harold isn't here," Cranston replied coldly. "And with all due respect to your brief time with this company, some of us have been making these decisions for decades. We know what we're doing." Several board members nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable but stayed silent. Derek realized with sinking clarity that this wasn't just about one acquisition. This was about the future direction of the entire company. People like Cranston had been waiting for an opportunity like this, a chance to reshape Bennett Enterprises into something focused purely on profit margins. The vote was scheduled for the following week. Derek left that meeting feeling sick. He visited Harold in the hospital that evening, finding him in a wheelchair, working on speech therapy exercises with a therapist. Harold's recovery was progressing, but he still struggled to form complete sentences, his frustration visible in his eyes. "The company," Harold managed to say slowly. "Worried." "Don't worry about the company," Derek said, though his tone wasn't convincing. "Focus on getting better." But Harold knew. He gripped Derek's hand with surprising strength, looking at him intently. "You, stop them." Derek wanted to laugh at the impossibility of it. Him? Stop the CFO and half the board of directors? He was 24 years old, barely a year removed from working a cash register. What could he possibly do? That night, Derek couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Harold's faith in him, about the 3,000 employees who had no idea their jobs hung in the balance, about what the company would become if people like Cranston won. He thought about his own journey, about being that person who couldn't afford groceries, about how one act of compassion had changed his entire life. At 2 a.m, Derek got out of bed and started working. If Cranston wanted to play with numbers and projections, Derek would show him different numbers, a different projection. For 6 days straight, Derek barely slept. He built a comprehensive alternative proposal, learning financial modeling software through online tutorials, reaching out to former professors from his community college classes, even calling some of Harold's old friends in the industry for advice. His plan was similar to what he'd proposed months ago, but more detailed, more thorough, addressing every possible objection. He proposed a partnership model instead of a hostile takeover. Bennett Enterprises would invest in Thompson's markets, help them modernize and become more efficient, but preserve the jobs and the community presence. It would take longer to see returns, but it would build goodwill, avoid the PR nightmare of mass layoffs, and align with the company's core values. The morning of the board meeting, Derek was exhausted. His eyes burned from staring at screens. He'd consumed enough coffee to fuel a small army. His hands trembled as he prepared his presentation files, but it wasn't from the caffeine. It was from fear. Fear of failing. Fear of letting Harold down. Fear of being that kid from Save Mart who didn't belong in this room after all. The boardroom was packed. All 12 directors sat around the massive oak table. Cranston stood at the front, confident and prepared, his presentation polished to perfection. He laid out his plan with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times before, showing projected profits, market share increases, shareholder value growth. "Any questions?" Cranston asked when he finished, his tone suggesting he didn't expect any real opposition. Derek raised his hand. "I'd like to present an alternative proposal." Cranston's expression tightened. "Derek, we don't have time for—" "Let him speak," interrupted Patricia. Derek was surprised. Patricia had warmed to him over the months, but she usually sided with the financial conservatives. "I'd like to hear what he has to say." Derek stood on shaky legs and walked to the front. He pulled up his presentation, and for a moment, he felt like that scared kid being called to the manager's office all over again. But then he thought about Harold counting out coins with trembling hands, about the dignity and simple kindness, about 3,000 families who deserved better. "Mr. Cranston's plan makes financial sense in the short term," Derek began, his voice growing steadier with each word. "But it ignores the human cost and the long-term damage to our brand reputation. Bennett Enterprises was built on the principle that we're not just a corporation, we're part of the communities we serve." He clicked through his slides, showing alternative financial models, community impact assessments, employee retention benefits, and long-term profitability projections. He presented case studies of other companies that had chosen acquisition over partnership and faced customer boycotts and reputation damage. He showed data on employee loyalty and how it correlated with customer satisfaction and sustained profit growth. "This isn't about being soft or sentimental," Derek said, looking directly at Cranston. "This is about smart business. Yes, we'll make money faster your way, but we'll make more money and build a stronger company if we stay true to the values that made Bennett Enterprises successful in the first place." When Derek finished, the room was silent. Cranston stood with his arms crossed, his expression dark. Then Thomas, the CFO who'd supported Derek's ideas before, spoke up. "Derek's numbers are solid. I've reviewed them. His projected 5-year returns actually exceed the aggressive acquisition model, and the risk is lower." "This is ridiculous," Cranston snapped. "We're going to let a cashier with barely any experience dictate major corporate strategy?" "He's not a cashier anymore," Patricia said quietly. "And his analysis is more comprehensive than yours, Robert. You focused purely on numbers. He considered the complete picture." The debate raged for 2 hours. Board members argued, voices raised, allegiances shifting. Finally, the chairman called for a vote. Derek held his breath as hands rose around the table. The vote was 7-5. Derek's proposal won. Cranston stood abruptly, his face red with anger. "This is a mistake. You're letting sentimentality cloud business judgment." He looked at Derek with barely contained rage. "Harold won't always be here to protect you. And when he's gone, we'll see how long this naive idealism lasts." He stormed out of the boardroom, and Derek knew he'd made a powerful enemy. But he'd also won. 3,000 people would keep their jobs. The company would stay true to its values, and most importantly, he'd honored the faith Harold had placed in him. 6 months later, Harold returned to the office part-time, his speech mostly recovered, his movement slower but steady. The partnership with Thompson's Markets was showing early success, exceeding projections. Harold called Derek into his office one afternoon, the same office where they'd had their first conversation about the executive training program. "I'm stepping back," Harold said simply. "Not completely, but I'm creating a new leadership structure. A team of executives who'll share responsibilities for guiding the company forward." He paused, looking at Derek with those same kind eyes that had watched him at a cash register so long ago. "I want you on that team. Vice President of Community Relations and Strategic Partnerships." Derek, now 25 years old, felt tears prick his eyes. "Harold, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. You've already proven yourself a dozen times over." Harold smiled. "You know what I've learned in 40 years of business, Derek? The best leaders aren't the ones with the most impressive credentials. They're the ones who never forget that business is about people. You could have climbed this corporate ladder by becoming like everyone else. Instead, you stayed true to who you are. That's rare. That's valuable." A year later, Derek stood in a Save Mart location, not as a visitor but as a volunteer. He'd started a program funded by Bennett Enterprises, offering scholarships and career training for retail workers who wanted to advance their education. 20 employees from various stores had received full scholarships in the program's first year. Derek worked the register for a few hours that Saturday, just like he used to. His hands remembered the rhythm, the scanning and bagging, the small talk with customers. Sheila still worked there, and she laughed when she saw him in his expensive suit putting on a green vest. "Couldn't stay away, huh?" she teased. "Some things you don't forget," Derek replied with a grin. "Besides, I wanted to remember." As Derek helped customers that afternoon, he thought about how far he'd come from that day when he'd paid for an elderly stranger's groceries. $4.37. Such a small amount. Such a simple act of kindness. But kindness is never really simple, and it's never really small. It ripples outward in ways you can't predict, touching lives you'll never know about, creating change that echoes far beyond the original moment. Derek had learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is see another person's dignity when they're struggling to see it themselves. And sometimes, when you help someone else stand up, you discover your own strength in the process. He'd been a cashier who became an executive. But really, he'd just been himself all along. That, Harold had taught him, was always enough.